Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 37 of the Golden Question podcast. In this episode, we're going to be answering the question: what does Richard Wolff get wrong about monopolies? Now, I was going to make a video about what he gets wrong about capitalism as a whole, but that podcast can go on for many hours because there's just so much stuff to talk about. So I might segment it, but certainly something that caught my attention because I was watching it. I've watched it before, but I was watching it again. Was his interview on Valuetainment with Patrick, Patrick Bet David, who he is a um, capitalist. He says he's a capitalist. But I wouldn't look at him as sort of this beacon of knowledge for capitalism or someone that represents capitalism well. He's probably not an Austrian economist at heart. I think he does have some Keynesian ideas that he supports. Um, but I haven't listened to a lot of his stuff. Believe it or not, when I listen to Valuetainment, it's a lot of the times with just some uh, pop culture figures, um, authors, some self help stuff. I don't really look at the economic stuff that he puts out, just because it's not something that I look towards in terms of wanting to expand my knowledge in economics. I don't go to Valuetainment for that. Um, if I want to expand my knowledge in economics, look at the Mises Institute, uh, Peter Schiff. I look at James Rickards, Jim Rogers, and I'm forgetting their names right now, but there's a bunch of others that I look at who work for the Mises Institute who have a lot to say about Austrian economics. Um, and when he had Richard Wolff, and I'll just refer to him as Wolff, on, they started to talk about monopolies. But before I start there, something that I just want to get out of the way is that I've never heard Wolf say this, and he said this for the first time on this podcast. He said, "Yeah, I'm against government. I'm skeptical of government." I mean, he blatantly said that towards the beginning of the podcast, and it even surprised Patrick. He's like, "Wait, you're you don't you're cautious of government. You're skeptical. You're a little bit weary." And if you take what he said at value, the rest of his argument really doesn't make sense because what I'm getting at is he says government is bad because you have all these people, these wealthy individuals, the super rich, who sort of, and I quote, he says this a lot, who pull the strings of government, and so government is bad. Um, I mean, I guess what he's saying is government isn't doing its job, and if only we had better people in government who didn't tempt themselves to these strings from the rich. But then it doesn't make sense because he says that you anybody you put in government is going to get influenced by these rich. So his sort of plan of action really is to get rid of the rich, um and then establish a government that has no ties to the rich. But you can't use government to get rid of government. I'm sorry, you can't use the government to get rid of the rich who are pulling the strings, because if the rich are pulling the strings, why would the rich allow government to sort of backstab itself? So this is really the whole communist manifesto, is that there's supposed to be this workers' revolution. There's supposed to be this massive uprising where all these workers go on strike. They rush over to all these billionaires. They um, they kill them, or they do whatever they do to them, steal their property, so that they can then create. I mean, they then have to go to government as well, because obviously a lot of these government officials who rely on these wealthy individuals, right, that just puppets him, and he uses that word too for government. These puppets, um, obviously, they're not going to want to leave their seats of position, and even if they don't even if they do want to leave, they should still get punished because they've been listening to these people. They've been acting as puppets. So yeah, they sort of share in the crime. And so you need to revolt against these wealthy individuals first because they're the ones who are pulling the string, and then you need to revolt against the government because they've been the puppets and they've been again sharing in the crimes. And then you need to build from scratch. So it's very, very idealistic. It requires bloodshed and tears, as they say. You need to have blood. You need to sacrifice in terms of killing or the destruction of property or theft. And this is really bad. Like how can you persuade others to your ideology by saying it requires all these negative things that we say are immoral? It requires death. It requires theft. It requires destruction. It requires just this overhaul of the system, such a negative way, and it just doesn't make any sense. If you want to make a system that supposedly is the best system in the world, why does it have to start so gruesomely? But anyways, that's something that I just wanted to get out of the way. Let's go back to the idea of monopolies. So I think this is where Patrick sort of falls flat. He doesn't really give a good counter argument to what Wolf was saying. And what Wolf was saying was capitalism is a competition of companies, right? All these companies are competing against consumers who are uh, wanting their products. And so as a company, as a business, you need to get the most amount of consumers into your business, and that means less consumers going into other businesses. So if everybody's competing, those who aren't able to attract as many businesses will eventually die out, and then you'll and he gave the example. He started off with 500, and then they eventually get down until you have two or three left. And then he says, in that case, those two or three, either they'll just end up being one because those two or three will just die out, or they will just, in a sense, he's saying they will merge into one, and they'll say the competition between us is not really worth the risk. Let's just shake hands. Let's merge our companies together, because it's only two or three of us. It's not that big of a deal, and we could become a monopoly. And really, Patrick's only argument against that was, give me an example today, which I don't see how that was a counter argument. But the problem with what Wolf is saying is he's sort of looking at it on too much of a macro level. He sort of has this false impression that g- what I'm saying is the argument that he's making relies on a false premise that all the companies, all these 500 companies I'm referring to as example, are producing the exact same good. The exact same good. And I'm going to give the example of potato chip. If these 500 companies are producing, and they have the same target audience, all right, they're in this, let's say they all sell nationally, right? They're not local. They all sell to people around the nation. So there's no specific market in terms of location or demographic. So they sell to everybody. So we're just making some constants there. So if they all produce the same bag of chips with the same ingredients and the same bag, right? The bag is all their bags are yellow, their bags all look the same, they all make the same exact chip, they use the same formula, they use the same recipe, they use the same manufacturing process. Um, they all market it the same way. Then yes, you will have a monopoly, a single company at the end that is able to do those things most efficiently. by reducing their costs to a level where they have the most amount of margin, in which they can use to expand, while others who aren't able to reduce their costs as much, uh, eventually fizzle out. So in that sense, yes. In when you start looking at it um, zoomed out, every business really is a monopoly in its own market segment, and that's what I'm going to refer to it as as a segment of the market. And this is the whole idea of business strategy really is, if I want to start my own business, I need to ask myself, what can I do that no other business is doing now? If I can make my own business that does something different in a different way, or even me creating a chip that is the same exact chip as Lay's, but instead of making the bag yellow, I make the bag red. Okay? In that sense, I'm changing the product. Although, yes, it's still potato chips, but I'm making a variety of that product, which will then attract a different set of consumers. There may be a consumer now that I've created a bag that what color did I say? Purple or black? Let's say I made a chip that's a bag of chips that's black. And then the one that my competitor has is yellow. There will be a consumer out there who says, you know what? Personal preference, I like the black bag of chips better than the yellow bag of chips. And then in that sense, you're gonna have a segmentation between the consumers in that you won't ever have a monopoly because you guys are not targeting the same consumer. At the end of the day, it's the personal preference of the consumer that will choose which company they want if all these variables and constants are given as I just said. So the problem that Wolf says is that he assumes that Amazon and Walmart, and he brings the example with Amazon and Walmart as if they're the same exact company. They do things slightly differently. They have different I mean, even the website is a differentiation, and that's the word that I wanted to include. Each company differentiates its product and its business from the other. And in that sense, yes, the business is a monopoly in its own market segment. If you take a list of all their the factors of their business, it is unique. What McDonald's does is unique. Although from a distance, McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, they look like they're doing the same thing. Each of them has a very own unique business strategy that's aimed at targeting a specific set of consumers. And at the end of the day, it always comes up to personal preference for the consumer. Do I like a company that has a female advertised as its logo, that's named that has a feminine name, um, and that has a chili soup, or do I value a company that says right? It's all even the marketing sometimes can differentiate companies. They can offer the same product, it's just they market it in different ways, even though they have the same product. So in that sense, that those two companies are differentiated. But at the end of the day, every company is a monopoly in its own target segment, right? Yes, there may have been points where I mean, very rare, but there could have been points where, yeah, there are two companies that make the same exact thing, and are located in the same area. I mean, if you're referring to back in time when companies were more localized, it was even more rare. But let's say the same city, you had two stores, couple of a walk away, right, a walking distance away, and they produced the same exact thing. They had the same logo, they had the same I guess maybe the same name, because it can even come down to the name. I like the name of this company better than that. And that could be a business strategy. One of our strategies is we like to have this type of name to appeal to these types of people, although it's not really a great strategy, but even sometimes the name, you could boil it down to even the name of the company could create a differentiation where you attract a certain set of consumers and not others. Um, but Wolf looks at it more in terms of just the general good that they produce, right? Oh, because they make chips, all these all these chip producing companies are competing against one another. They're not. I mean, there are companies that that acknowledge that there are other companies that offer a similar good or service, but they probably don't recognize them as a competitor. They're doing their own thing. I'm doing my own thing. And as I said, I'm going to bring it back to what we learn and what we all learn in a regular your entry level marketing class or business policy class. It's if you want to start your own business, you need to have a business strategy. And part of that business strategy is finding out how you can differentiate yourself against competitors. And yes, we use this term competitors very loosely because you could compete with different companies in terms of different things. So in the most absolute sense, there are no competitors, right? You just have companies that are monopolies that focus on their specific target segment. In the absolute sense, if you factor in all the variables, but if you just say, all right, let's just look at potato chips made from potatoes. Yes, then you could say, okay, these companies are in competition, or companies that have large retail, big box locations. Then you could say, um, let's classify those set of companies as competitors. But in the most absolute sense, really, your company should have no competitors because you're providing a service that is very unique. Now, you can be localized, right? If I have my business only in Seattle and I only serve to that community, let's say I don't do shipping, or even if I do, it still probably will make a um even if it's like not a significant portion of my business. But if I have a business in Seattle and somebody else decides to open up the same exact business as me, everything the same, no differences, in Florida, it's still there's still a difference in that we advertise or we provide our services to two different people, and that is a business strategy. Part of our business strategy that differentiates ourselves from that company is we offer our goods or services to people who live in Florida while they offer their goods and services to people who live in Seattle. And in that sense, the businesses are technically monopolies within that market segment. So in terms of Seattle, yeah, that business is a monopoly in terms of specifically what it does for that type of consumer. And the same goes for the one in Florida. What I'm trying to say at the end of the day is that every business in the technical absolute terms is a monopoly in its own specific market segment. And that's the whole beauty is that you have a variety of different goods and services in a US economy. You don't have when people say variety of goods and services that I could choose from, you're not choosing between the same thing. You go to the supermarket, you see a bunch of different things. Yeah, there some items might have more variations than others, but at the end of the day, each item is different. There are no items that are exactly the same. And you could even take it further by saying even if the item itself was exactly the same, the marketing could be different. The name of the company is different. The culture of the company is different. There are certain differences that can constitute a as a distinction that now the consumer could say, all right, which company do I want to buy it from? Do I like that their packaging or this packaging? And in that's where the personal preference of the consumer comes. And in that sense, you can never have an absolute monopoly because we all as people have different interests, right? We all like different things. And so there's no way for one company to capture 100% of the market because in that in according to Wolff's logic, right, you're always going to have a lot of companies and then it's going to consolidate into one at the end. So at that stage where you have all these different companies, it's impossible for one company to capture 100% of the margin right away because there are going to be other companies that satisfy different personal preferences that their consumers have. And so, really, at the end of the day, every company is a monopoly in its own specific market segment. You can take certain variables of that company and compare it, and I guess you can call it sort of a comparative factor or a comparative, um, yeah, I guess a comparative factor that you could take and then say, all right, any company that shares these factors, we can call it a competitor in this sense. Okay. And again, it's this really shows you just how complex the economy is. It's not simple, right? People A lot of economists try to present it as this simplified thing where yeah, you have industries and you have competitors and you have businesses that just make simple goods and services. It is a very complex process. There are many different things that goes into the production of goods and services, and there's so many different variables. And there's so many different ways that a company can be different from another company. And once you begin to understand that, and really once and this is sort of the I would say the miracle of capitalism, is that once you start to understand the complexities of the market, then you truly appreciate the market. And I kind of reference this back to the in my opinion, knowledge in general, is that everybody, when they look at something for the first time, or when they just start learning something, they think it's easy, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And once you start to realize, or once you start to get to know what you don't know, then you sort of to become humble and acknowledge just how complex the situation is, and then you start realizing how much you don't know, um and how much more dumb you are, right? It's like dumb people think that they're smart while smart people think that they're dumb. And the reason why that's the case is because a dumb person doesn't know anything. And so how are they going to compare their intellectual level to anything else? While a smart person knows a lot more, and they are able to see or just glance at stuff that they don't know, and then they could sort of make a comparison in terms of their intelligence relative to what's actually out there, right? It's almost like if you live in a house, or let's say you lived in a box and you've never seen anything else outside of that box. You think the world is your box. It's a matter of perspective. And you think, hey, I know a lot. This If this box is all the world is, I'm a pretty smart guy. I know everything that's in this box. I've looked at it for a while. I know all the corners. Um, but once you open the door, now they know a lot of the stuff that they previously didn't know. Then they start realizing, wait a second, I was actually wrong before. I actually don't know a lot. There's a lot of stuff out there that I didn't know. So once you start to know what you don't know, that's when you realize how much you don't know. And I relate this back also to religion, is that a lot of people, when they start looking at life from at a glance, they think, yeah, I mean, I understand life. There's universes, there's galaxies, there's planets, there's people. We all evolved from animals, and we've that small organism, the one-celled organism, turn into bacteria, a couple celled organism, and then that just mutates and grows. And they have this very simplified version of the world. If you Once you have the simplified version of the world, you don't believe in God, because you don't see the actual complexities. Once you go down and take a microscope and really zoom into the micro level, um, and look at all the complexities of just within a cell, which is something that you probably weren't aware of, just the individual cell and the individual um, uh, structures within the cell. And you take a telescope and you look out into the universe and you see all these galaxies, and each galaxy has its own planet and stars. And each planet has its own environment and different uh, elements of the periodic table, and all these formations, and all these different chemical elements. Once you start to look at it from a broader picture, now you start to see how much you don't know, and then you start uh, appreciating more of the world. And then you could say, hey, I mean, all this is way too complex. The nature is way too complex for me to just say this all happened by chance. And so, if we relate this back to Wolf, once you start understanding how complex the economy is, how complex the market is, that's when you can begin to appreciate how this thing all works. Like, how does it even manage to make itself work despite it being this complex? And the correlations between the economy and nature are so glaringly obvious for me. The economy is sort of a uh humanized version of the ecosystem, the natural ecosystem, right? Economy, ecosystem. It's no coincidence that they sound the same because they're sort of the same thing. All these things working in tangent together without human intervention, right? And this is why I find it ironic that uh, a lot of environmental activists and environmental scientists tend to be left leaning and they believe in all this government intervention. But then when it comes to the environment, hey, can humans step in to do something? Oh no, that's a sin. You gotta let nature do its thing. Do not come in. So they're against human intervention when it comes to ecosystems and biology, but when it comes to the economy, yeah, have all the government intervention there. Um, so for back to finish my point with Wolf, once Wolf or any socialist really start to understand the complexities of the market and it's not as simple as they think it is, then they could say to themselves, yeah, you know what? I don't think a politician or a government official that we vote into office really has any level of first of all has any level of understanding of the economy, let alone has the ability or competence to produce a solution that might actually work given all these different complexities. And remember, these officials are voted in, right? It's not like to become a politician or to become a politician to vote in these laws, you need to take an exam or you need to prove how smart you are. Anybody can get elected as long as they get the majority of the votes, they get elected and now all of a sudden they're steering this economic ship. Um and supposedly the socialists really strongly believe in democracies, although they and this is why democracies aren't really that great is because all you're doing is voting for a person, and as long as that person gets the majority vote, all of a sudden they have all this power. But why should they get all this power? I mean, just because we as a majority voted for that person to get all this power, what makes him just to get that power? Is it just because we all said, "Let's, give him that power, therefore he deserves that power"? What if we all vote for the wrong person? What if somebody else was supposed to get the power, but because we followed this democratic, style, this democratic format, another person gets it? Um, so once you start realizing government is just a bunch of officials that we vote for, and they have no knowledge, no understanding, in-depth understanding of the complexities of the economy, then you could say, you know what, government really is not the solution. We should really, if I believe in that, if I believe in you can relate it back to the ecosystem. If I believe that nature, if you let it work on its own, um, whether it be a mystical interpretation of it, or maybe you might have some scientific explanation, although I would disagree with that. But let's say you have this scientific belief of how nature can work without human intervention. Try to apply that to the economy. Maybe the economy could work in a way similar to the ecosystem where things just balance out into equilibrium without human intervention. And that when government steps in, just as how people and government step into and caused a lot of problems in terms of the natural environment and the ecosystem, maybe the same could apply for the economy. As always, thanks for listening.